Hello everyone, I hope you're all having a wonderful day. My name is Anna and I welcome you guys back to another English Torah video here on the channel of Jóvenes Perinando. In today's video, we will be analyzing chapters 11 and 12 of Numbers, which is titled The Tongue That Eats and Speaks Curse, where we will be analyzing the very concept that the title conveys. As we all know, the tongue is an organ that is part of us and it plays and carries out a big role in our lives, since it is responsible not only for helping us to carry out different activities on our day, such as eating, but also for speaking. Either we use it to speak the good or speak bad. And this is something that we're going to be focusing on within these two chapters of the book of Numbers. And within the scriptures, we can take for reference two verses. The first verse we can find in Proverbs 18, verse 21, that says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruits." The second verse that we can take for reference is found in Luke 6, verse 45, that says, "A good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of." So, today we will be learning about how the mouth and tongue are guided by carnality, giving it rise to an uncontrollable appetite, which is complaining and gossiping. With this short introduction, now we will begin reading verses 1 to 3 of chapter 11 that says, "Now the people of Israel complained about their hardships in the hearing of the Eternal, and when he heard them, his anger was aroused. Then fire from the Eternal burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. When the people cried out to Moses, he prayed to the Eternal, and the fire died down. So that place was called Daberah, because fire from the Eternal had burned among them." All this event that we can read in these verses, it happened once the people of Israel left at the sight of the cloud that guided them on their way to the promised land. But suddenly we can read that a complaint without reasoning arises among the people. Because of this complaint was not only heard by the people of Israel, but it was also heard by the Creator. And this caused the Creator to show his displeasure, sending a fire that consumed the outskirts of the camp, and therefore some people who were camping in that area died. Due to this event, this place was marked, receiving the name Daberah from the dictionary Strong Hebrews 8404, which means burning. And also in verse 3, we can read that the fire finally went out when Moses intercedes for the people of Israel. Thanks to passages like this, it is that an Elohim, or God as they call him, is usually seen as bad. However, it is clearly shown that this fire was not sent just for the sake of it, but that there was a cause or effect that led to this consequence, which was the result of the complaint of the part of the people of Israel. And although we are going to continue seeing how this complaint did not end in that place, because although yes, they did witness the fire because of a consequence that they had to receive sent by the Creator, however, this did not make them stop there, but they continued to complain in the verses that we're going to be reading. And in this verse, we can also see and we can learn a lesson for our lives, because we can see that as human beings, we are very easy to be carried away by some sort of feeling that we experience in that certain moment. And although we may not have a reasonable reason to feel that way, however, this is why we do things and say things that are not pleasing to the Creator. as it was in the case of the Israelite people that in these verses. From verses 14 to 15, we are able to read about the people's request to eat meat. But first, we're going to read verse 4 that says, "The rabble with them began to crave other food, and again the Israelites started wailing and said, 'If only we had meat.'" Here we can read that the people of Israel began to ask for meat. This began by the foreigners who lived within the Israelite camp, either those who had left Egypt with the people of Israel, adding themselves to the people of Israel, or those who had joined on the way to the promised land. And although these people were part of the people of Israel, however, they did have inside of their hearts Egypt, although this did not apply to all foreigners. And due to this, it is why it caused their words to come out, and it gave rise to complaint within the people of Israel, which obviously the Eternal heard this. And from verses 5 to 6, we will be able to read how these people continue to complain about the food that the Creator had given them. The verses say, "We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost, all the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna." As we were mentioning, this complaint infected the people of Israel to seek the same desire to consume meat and vegetables and fruits. And here we can realize that the contempt was not only towards the manna that the Creator had provided to the people of Israel, but it was also towards the Creator who sustained them through the manna. Let's remember that the manna was a food that literally fell from the sky for the people of Israel to eat. From verses 7 to 15, we are able to read that despite the fact that the complaint was directly with the Creator, but even so, Moses, as a leader who was in charge of the people of Israel, his responsibility was such. Although this situation, humanly speaking, it was difficult to be resolved due to, in this case, Moses had no idea where he could have or where he could get all this meat from to sustain the whole people of Israel. But for this reason, it is why we read that Moses turns to the Creator in order to seek an answer and obtain his help. Moses here in these verses, it shows us the responsibility to lead an entire community, and that it was very difficult to keep the people of Israel happy. But we can also see how Moses trusts in the Eternal and asks him for help and guidance. This, for us nowadays, it becomes as an example on how us as human beings, as believers in the same faith of the Messiah, it shows us how we should act when we find ourselves in difficult situations. From verses 16 to 35, we are able to read the response and punishment that the Eternal had towards the people of Israel due to this food complaint that they had, where we can read that there also was a selection of 70 elder men within the people of Israel. This selection of the 70 was to limit the responsibility that Moses had, and for this reason, it is why the Creator instructs Moses to gather 70 men from the elders of Israel who should not only meet the appropriate age, but also meet other characteristics, such as they had to be mature, wise, experienced, upright, they were not drinkers of wine, and they were not to be dishonest. In that way, these people could take charge properly. From there, it is where the advice begins that within the assembly, it would be made up of 70 elders and the great minister. But obviously, this in our days is no longer standing, since let's remember that the Messiah came to remove all of this. In these verses, we can read that once the 68 men were gathered around the Mishkan and the other 2 men who remained in the camp, the Creator manifested himself in the cloud, where he spoke and took the spirit of Moses. This referring to the authority that Moses had as a leader to put him over the men. This in Hebrew terms is known as the Simcha, which was passed from generation to generation until the time of the Messiah would come. And we can find this in Matthew 21, verse 43. As we all have already studied, the Messiah, being the one sent and having the authority by the Creator, calls his disciples, his 11 disciples, passing them to be known as the Shaliachim, which is sent by the Messiah. And we can find this in John 20, verse 21 to 23. In these verses of chapter 11, we can read that the 70 began to prophesy, but 2 of them did it outside the camp of reunion, the tent of reunion. And they did it in the camp. And this seemed bad towards the servant of Moses, who, as we remember, was a young man named Joshua, for whom he had jealousy for his master. He thought that in some way it could harm or minimize it. However, in Moses, we can see that humility and understanding. After all, Moses did think that it was better that everyone prophesied. That is to say, that out of every single person, the words of the Creator would come out of their mouth. We can read that Moses and the elders go to the camp where the Creator responds to the people of Israel in a miraculous way through a wind that brought meat with it. But this response was brought with a punishment, since the meat was not only going to be provided for a whole month straight, but this was going to cause the people of Israel to end up hating the meat. However, it was not long before the people of Israel began to have an unbridled appetite. And because of this behavior, we can read that the Creator kills, sending a plague. This caused this place to be marked, receiving the name Kibrot Hatava, which means graves of the greedy. Passing those events, we can read that the people of Israel left to Haserot, where all the things did not come to an end, but it did continue. Since in chapter 12, we will be able to see about the gossip of Aaron and Miriam towards Moses, where it brought with it a bad consequence. Before reading the verses of chapter 12, it is important that we understand what the malicious tongue is and what consequences it brings when we use it. In Hebrew terms, this is known as Lashon Hara, which has to do mainly with the words that are not used to edify, since those words arise from what is inside of that person, giving rise to gossip. And this is what we can read in these verses of chapter 12 that both Aaron and Miriam fell into, although apparently one more than the other. In these verses, we will be able to read that Miriam is mentioned first, who apparently had a predominant role in the gossip when it all started. And this not only because of the order that it was mentioned within the verses, but also because she was the only one who did receive leprosy as a punishment. And leprosy in Hebrew, it is called as sarat. According to the book of Leviticus, chapter 13, we have already studied the instructions that are given related to the care and process that a person had to take when they had this disease of leprosy, which obviously we already read that it had no cure. However, we could read that there was a way that it could disappear indefinitely. And as we have already studied, this disease was presented in different parts of the human body. Although not only in the human body, since it could also arise in certain objects and even in houses. All the leprosy that was found in a person was due to a punishment or a consequence that was given to them by the Creator because of some sin that they had committed. Everything that was seen externally on the skin of that person was only a reflection of what was inside that person. To better understand what the verses say about this event of Aaron and Miriam, let's begin reading chapter 12, verses 1 to 8 that say, Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife that he had married in Cushite. Has the Eternal spoken only through Moses? They asked. Hasn't he also spoken through us? And the Eternal heard this. Now, Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. At once the Eternal said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, come out of the tent of meeting, all three of you. So the three of them went outside. Then the Eternal came down in a pillar of cloud. He stood at the entrance of the tent of reunion and summoned Aaron and Miriam. When the two of them stepped forward, he said, listen to my words. When this is a prophet among you, I, the Eternal, reveal myself to them in visions. I speak to them in dreams. But this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak face to face, clearly and not in riddles. He sees the form of the Eternal. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? Here we can read that the only family that Moses had speaked against him because of the Cushite woman that he had taken as his wife. There are different assumptions about what happened in this event. Some people think that perhaps Zipporah, Moses' first wife, had died, and that this Cushite wife that he had taken, he took it after Zipporah's death, which in his time it was allowed to do that. It wasn't seen as bad. One term that is used in these verses is the word Cushite, which can refer to the sons of Ham, although it can also mean under the control of the Ethiopians. Although it was also taken as a basis for applying the name Cushite to the people who were not descendants of Cush, but however they were under his control. It may be possible that Cushite here was a degrading term used to criticize Zipporah for her appearance, that she had a dark complexion being an Ethiopian. And she was called this because she was graceful in form and beautiful in appearance. And she was a different woman due to her good deeds, comparing her to the other women that were part of her generation and that were from that same place. Not only did Aaron and Miriam use this label to refer to Zipporah, but from there they began to question the place that Moses carried, because on previous occasions we have read that the Creator had also used both Miriam and Aaron to talk through them. However, in this case, Moses who was described as the most humble man, he was chosen by the Creator. Here we can see the jealousy and arrogance through the words of these people, which not only stayed among them, but the Creator listened to them, the Creator heard them. And this led to the Father calling them out to the Mishkan so that they would hear his words about Moses, a faithful servant with whom he spoke directly to. As we have already studied, the life of Moses was a shadow of the Messiah, and we can confirm this in Deuteronomy 18:18. Nowadays, when we have that responsibility to represent and recognize the Messiah correctly, not only with our words, but also by giving a good testimony towards the others. Continuing reading the last verses of this chapter 12, verses 9 to 16, it says, The anger of the Eternal burned against them, and he left them. When the cloud lifted from above the tent, Miriam's skin was leprous. It became as white as snow. Aaron turned towards her and saw that she was and saw that she had a defiling skin disease. And he said to Moses, "Please, I ask you not to hold against us the sin that we have so foolishly committed. Do not let her be like a stillborn infant coming from its mother's womb, with its flesh half eaten away." So Moses cried out to the Eternal, "Please, Elohim, heal her." The Eternal replied to Moses, "If her father had spat in her face, would she have not been disgraced for 7 days? Confine her outside the camp for 7 days. After that, she can be brought back." So Miriam was confined outside the camp for 7 days, and the people did not move until she was brought back. After that, the people left Hazeroth and camped in the desert of Paran. In these last verses of chapter 12, we can read about the punishment that the Eternal gave to Aaron and Miriam, specifically to Miriam. We can read that the Creator not only spoke to these people, but he also punished them, despite how close they could have been to Moses. And as we have read, all of this happened because they were not afraid to speak against the servant of the Creator, who was Moses. In our days, we do not see immediate consequences when people commit this action, but according to what it says in Hebrew 10, verse 28 and 29, the punishment for stomping on the blood of the Messiah is irreversible. In this case, the verses of the book of Numbers say that once the cloud parted, the punishment of leprosy came upon Miriam. And when Aaron saw it, he interceded for her, which led him to go to Moses and confess the sin that they both had committed. Then that is when we can read that Moses intercedes with the Creator. However, we can read that the punishment was necessary, and in this case, Miriam remained with leprosy for 7 days. And once this period of time passed, then she was able to, well, not only was she clean again, but she was also able to go back to the camp. And that is when we can read that the people of Israel left and they began camping in the desert of Paran. And well, this is all for today's video. Thank you very much for all your time. If you like this video, you can give us a thumbs up. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can leave them in the comment section down below. Thank you once again, and bye.